Hi, everybody, and welcome to the next edition of Foods to Become Friends With. And the topic today, the food that we're going to get to know a little bit better, is one called nutritional yeast. You may not have heard of this one before. In French, the translation is levure alimentaire. So let's start off by asking, first of all, what is this weird thing called nutritional yeast? First of all, and very importantly, nutritional yeast is not the same as baker's or brewer's yeast. And the reason I say this is very important, and the reason this is the first thing on my list, is that sometimes in years past when I've spoken about nutritional yeast, students will go out to the supermarket and they'll mistakenly get baker's or brewer's yeast. And let's just say that the results and the consequences of that decision are not always the best when it comes to improving the flavor of your food. So really keep that in mind as we go throughout here, that this is a different form of yeast than the one that you might be baking with or the one that you might be brewing with. And that if you are inclined to go and search this out afterwards, make sure absolutely that it's written nutritional, alimentaire, on the label. So nutritional yeast, it actually is similar to the yeast that people use in baking. Of course, it's in the same family. It's called yeast. But the difference with nutritional yeast is that it undergoes a heating and a drying process that renders the yeast inactive. So if you're a little bit worried about, oh, hang on, like Daniel, you're going to suggest that I put yeast into my body later on, isn't that going to cause my stomach to go crazy, maybe expand, something like that? Isn't that what yeast is supposed to do? Don't worry, because the expansional properties of yeast have been eliminated, have been rendered inactive here in nutritional yeast. And then finally, let's just get to a real definition here. Nutritional yeast is a very nutritious and is relatively inexpensive, and many would say tasty, way to add nutrients to your food. So let's take a look at those nutrients in a little bit more detail. So for a quarter cup of fortified nutritional yeast, and this is another thing to keep in mind that is important. Sometimes when you'll go to the store, you'll find different varieties of nutritional yeast, some of which is not fortified and others are. I would always suggest getting the fortified version of them. They've had more vitamins added to them. Even if you get the unfortified version of nutritional yeast, it's still going to be good for you and it's still going to taste good. But if you have the choice, then why not get the fortified one? And in many places, actually, all you're going to find is the fortified one. But I just bring that up again, just to encourage you to pay close attention to the label. So in a quarter cup of nutritional yeast, there's 8 grams of protein. So you can see already that this is quite a good source of protein for people who are wanting to reduce the consumption of animal-based products. Granted, a quarter cup is probably more than you're going to eat in a single setting, but even if you have half of that, an eighth of a cup, that's not unreasonable for some of the suggestions I'm going to give later on. That would still provide you with a fairly good serving of protein, 4 to 5 grams, keeping in mind that the average woman needs 46 and the average man needs 56 grams of protein. So we're talking just from something that I'm going to encourage you to sprinkle on top of your food. And as a protein goes, the protein that is in nutritional yeast is very good for you. It's a complete protein. You may know about this from biochemistry or your nutrition classes, that there are 9 different types of amino acids and that some of them are not present in different forms of protein. But the protein that is in nutritional yeast is a complete protein because it includes all of those amino acids. There's also 3 grams of fiber. That's not bad either in a quarter cup. And then really the main appeal for nutritional yeast in terms of the nutritional content is its very high B vitamin content. So B vitamins are very important. You can get most of them from fruits and vegetables or other sources, nuts and things like that. But nutritional yeast really packs a punch with all of the V vitamins, or a significant number of them all in one. And so you can see that it contains vitamins B1, B2, and B6. And by the way, you'll notice there, when you see the words thiamine and riboflavin, you may have seen those on nutritional labels listed separately. But for example, riboflavin, it is B2. that's just a simpler name that we give for something like riboflavin. But the big appeal in terms of the B vitamins, especially for people on a plant-based diet, is the content of vitamin B12. So let's take a look a little bit closer at vitamin B12 and why it's important and why this is a good source. So first of all, it's really important to note that vitamin B12 is the only vitamin, is the only nutrient that cannot be obtained in a plant-based, a vegan diet. So you see the image I have up here on the upper right. These are all sources of vitamin B12. What do all those foods share in common? It's not hard to see that they're all animal-based. You've got fish and mussels and eggs and beef and liver and things like that. Milk and yogurt are good sources as well. And so for most people who consume animal products, they've got no problem worrying about B12 because these animal products are rich in those vitamins. But if for ethical or environmental or health reasons, you want to switch to a more plant-based vegan diet or an entirely vegan diet, then this is going to be something that you really want to watch out for, because everything else you can get by eating plants and pulses and soy and things like that. But vitamin B12 you can't. So I think it is important to at least mention that from a nutritional standpoint, on that level, your body can get everything it needs from plant-based sources. So for people who say that it's a nutritional requirement to eat animal-based foods, that's false. Everything your body needs can be gotten from plants. So B12, and the reason why it's so important here is that it's very critical for neurological and metabolic functioning. So if you're B12 deficient, this can lead to some rather unpleasant and permanent effects. To get a B12 deficiency, you'd probably have to try pretty hard nowadays. But especially when people were adopting vegan diets 30 or 40 years ago, when fortified foods weren't so readily available, some people did develop over the long term, say over a couple years, some rather serious problems. If you're experiencing tingling in your feet or toes or extreme fatigue, those are usually the first signs that you might be low in vitamin B12. So don't let it get to that point. And probably almost everybody here in this class is okay with B12, even if you're a vegan and you've never taken nutritional yeast. You've probably gotten it in other sources like fortified milks and things like that. But I do want to put that out there that you do need to watch out for this if you're going to a vegan diet. So in nutritional yeast, the B12 is made by a bacteria. So, we could think about, we are still taking life in that respect. I mean, even when you eat a plant-based diet, you're still taking the lives of the plants, and considering also the worms and the insects that probably were killed in the growing of those plants. Vegan is not entirely death-free. It's just less death than an animal-based diet, or less sentience than an animal-based diet. And, I will fully admit that bacteria are a form of life, and, it's tragic that you have to feed on life to keep yourself alive. But there is a fairly big difference between a bacteria and a fish or a cow, in terms of the fact that the animals I mentioned have a developed nervous system that allows them to feel pleasure and pain. As far as we know, bacteria don't have that capacity. Maybe we'll discover that in the future, but it's clear that, as my friend Alan Watts likes to say, that cows will scream louder than carrots, which really indicates that there's a difference in sentience between animals and plants. And I would argue that bacteria are even a little bit lower down on the scale, on the spectrum of sentience. So, like I said, you need to watch out for this if you're a vegan. Like I said, that you can get them in alternative milk. So almost every soy milk or almond milk or oat milk that you'll buy on the market has B12 added to it automatically, because they know that people who buy those products tend towards more of a vegan lifestyle. You can also just get it straight up through a vitamin. If you take a multivitamin, probably has it in there. Or if you're really concerned, you could take a specific B12 vitamin. But just 1 tablespoon of nutritional yeast will get you nearly double the recommended daily amount. And I should also mention that the body stores B12. So if you get a bunch of it one day, if you get like 10 times your daily serving, then your body will be able to hold on to that additional, the excess of vitamin that you've consumed. I don't know exactly for how long, but it's not the sort of thing that you have to make sure to eat every single day, because your body can go a couple days or even longer without it if you've consumed a good source of it in the past. So how to use this? Very easy. If you're a fan of popcorn with your movies, instead of butter, you can sprinkle nutritional yeast on it and salt. Check that out. See how it tastes. One of the things that people really like about nutritional yeast is that it somewhat mimics the taste of cheese. So that's why you're going to see so many of these things are suggestions for how to use it as an alternative to cheese. And I should also mention that nutritional yeast it activates the part of our palate called the umami. So there's different types of tastes in your mouth, like sweet and bitter and sour, and umami, it means tasty. And so if you've ever eaten anything with MSG, you'll know that the taste of that food tends to be rather good. It brings out the taste of the other things that the MSG is on. And so the same thing is true of nutritional yeast. It's going onto the palate, a part of the palate that really excites human taste buds. So if you're making risotto, a rice-based dish that's very easy, you can use nutritional yeast instead of Parmesan cheese. You could make your own cheese sauce with nutritional yeast and some oil. You could make a vegan mac and cheese. Jamie Oliver and other chefs have recipes on how to do that. If you're making a soup, like a potato soup or a butternut squash soup, stir it in, add in some additional nutrients, and it'll improve the taste. You can add it, if you do eat eggs, you could add it directly onto the eggs, or better yet, if you want to go fully vegan, you could make a tofu scramble or tofu scramble. And I'm going to talk about that in just a second. Or if you're making a stuffing or something like that, say for Thanksgiving or Christmas or the holidays, then you could add nutritional yeast into it. So basically anywhere where you would put cheese, you could put nutritional yeast, and anywhere where you're looking for a little bit of additional flavor, taste, and nutrients, you could do it. You could also just put it straight onto a salad, for example, in addition to your salad dressing. My favorite use, which is to say the easiest use, this is the thing that I use nutritional yeast for the most because it's the absolute simplest way to do it, is that I like to take a block of extra firm tofu. So remember when we were talking about soy, I was saying that tofu comes in many different varieties. There's soft and firm. Make sure that you get extra firm for this. It holds together. And so cut that into cubes like you see here on the image. Just fry it up in a pan for a few minutes with some olive oil. Olive oil is a really good oil to cook with. It's very nutritious. And it depends on your preference for how crispy you want your tofu to be. You could cook it for anywhere from 2 to 3 minutes and just get it very lightly browned on some sides to really making sure that all the sides are cooked. And that might take something more like 10 minutes. But after you're done cooking the tofu to your liking, then take, again, depending on your preference for salt and depending on your sensitivity to salt, I would suggest if you're doing a whole block of tofu, then something like 3 or 4 tablespoons of soy sauce would be probably called for. Maybe there are people in your family who have issues with sodium, so try to get a low sodium version of soy sauce. And also maybe add less if that's an issue for you. And then just sprinkle a generous portion of the nutritional yeast on it. You can really go crazy with it until all the sides are coated. So you see up there in the image, this is actually a picture of a baked dish. So you could do the same exact thing that I just mentioned. Instead of frying it in a pan, you could mix the tofu, coat it with some oil, and put it in the oven to bake. So there's a couple different ways that you might make this. So I make this probably at least once a week. My kids love it. It's really simple, quick, it's easy. It's a fantastically rich, nutritious food to eat. And if you make this with a little bit of rice on the side and maybe with some additional vegetables, like some steamed carrots or some frozen vegetables, then this is the sort of thing that you can put together in 15 to 20 minutes. And you'll have yourself a fairly inexpensive, nutritious, and most importantly, very tasty meal. Now, finally, the last slide mentioned a tofu scramble, and this is another sort of variation that you could take on this. So instead of cubing the tofu, what you can do is take the block of tofu and squeeze it in your hands and just let it sort of go into little pieces like that. And you'll see that it's a very sort of, I don't know exactly how to describe the texture, but you'll squeeze it down and you'll see that it will become something different. And you can just fry that up with some onions, maybe some tomatoes, and the same idea, soy sauce and Nutritional Yeast. That is great for brunches, by the way. Whenever I have friends over for brunch, we usually make a tofu scramble like that, chop up some vegetables, get some hard tortillas. I think that they're called tortas. They're kind of like a tortilla chip, but in a wider sort of circle. You can get a package of those, and those are super good to go with tofu scramble. But it's the same basic idea where you're using tofu and Nutritional Yeast and soy sauce to put it together. So this is part of the reason why I like to mention Nutritional Yeast at this point in the class, because we just got done recently talking about tofu, and this is a really good way to put those two things together. It makes the tofu tastier and it adds more nutrition to it as well. And as I try to emphasize here, it's extremely easy. So for those of us on a budget or living alone and our students, then this is a really great food to know. So go ahead, take a look at that. As I say, experiment. Try to find it in the supermarket. Most every supermarket has it, usually in the organic section, sometimes in other sections. You can get a packet for anywhere from $5 to $10, and that will probably last you quite some time. And then just try it out and see what your favorite use is. And if you come up with a use that I haven't listed here, then I would really love to know about it so that I can include it on future versions of this class.